The film, Down Memory Lane, is a tribute to those air warriors who shaped the destiny of our Air Force with a strong sense of conviction, confidence, and discipline, and guided it forward as a strong and professional Air Force. 6 trained pilots, 19 Hawaii sepoys, and 4 fabric-covered Westland Wapiti aircraft were all that we had for an absolute humble beginning. Today, the Indian Air Force has grown considerably and can look back with justified pride and satisfaction at its achievements in the last 73 years. The demands of combat readiness are unrelenting. With a vast border to defend and diverse operating terrain, the Indian Air Force is fully prepared to meet any challenges of today and the future. Besides this, the IAF has, on numerous occasions in the past, been called upon to provide relief operations in natural calamities and disasters. In all these instances, the IAF has earned accolades from all quarters for its prompt and sterling performances. The film covers the evolution, operational experiences, growth, and modernization of the IAF, depicted as reminiscences of Marshal of the Air Force Arjan Singh, DFC, a highly distinguished and daring air warrior himself. The film is also an invaluable treasure of some rare photographs and archival memorabilia. In-depth research work, creativity, and poetic touches in the commentary are the hallmarks of this film that will take the Indian Air Force to the homes and hearts of viewers. Jai Hind.
On this earth millions come, with dreams, hopes and aspirations, but vanish into the oblivion, without singing their song or appreciations. None to notice them, no one to remember. But there is a rare breed, men of courage, valor and deed. Humility, patience, forbearance unbound, spreading their fragrance all around. Their fame overlooking time and space, doing their nation proud, symbolizing the human race. The ones that brought glory to their motherland, with their radiance resonating ever grand. They are held in high esteem, country's honor they nourish with reverence, their land of birth they redeem. By the side of Delhi's Palam Airport is located the historic museum of the Indian Air Force, showcasing the glorious, eventful, thrilling and turbulent past of the Indian Air Force. It proudly displays almost all the vintage aircraft, their weaponry, the glorious deeds of its pilots, technicians and airmen in the form of photographs, scriptures and testaments placed like glittering mementos in this museum. Each piece reverberates the glorious image of the Indian Air Force and the historic achievements of its personnel. A rare and beautifully replicated saga of touching the sky with glory. Today, this spectacular monument of Indian Air Force awaits the arrival of one of its legends, the first Air Chief Marshal and the first Marshal of the Indian Air Force, Arjan Singh, DFC. Born on 15th April 1919 in district Lailpur, Arjan Singh had his early education at Montgomery. He was a very good sportsman and an excellent swimmer. He captained his province in freestyle swimming and was a national record holder of his time. After securing second position in the Armed Forces entrance exam, he joined the Royal Air Force College, Cranwell in 1938, where he became vice captain of the college athletics, hockey and aquatic teams. He stood first in his batch and was commissioned in December 1939. A courageous, brave and skillful fighter pilot, he brought pride and glory not only to the Indian Air Force but to the whole nation. He is the only Chief of Staff and the only Indian twice invited to inspect the passing out parade at Royal Air Force College, Cranwell. Indeed, a rare and a unique honor for an Indian. An aviator with a distinguished flying career of 4,500 hours, piloting 65 different types of aircraft, encompassing landing and takeoffs from 178 different airfields of the world. In December 2004, Marshal Arjan Singh donated 2 crore rupees towards the formation of Marshal of the Indian Air Force and Mrs. Arjan Singh Trust for the welfare of the ex-Air Force personnel and their families.
Sometimes one longs to peep back into the most cherished moments of his life, transcending down through the colorful reflections of his golden past, recollecting moments which have become a valuable treasure of his life. A memorable journey down the memory lane, revisualizing the most meaningful days spent and cherishing the fragrance of nostalgic memories of the colorful past.
Where one has lived some glorious moments of life, one longs to traverse once again through the colorful lanes of thrill and strife. Whenever the bell of age rings, fragrant memories start blossoming, and life passing by always brings the scent of unforgotten flowers, those meaningful moments and the golden hours. Nostalgia rekindles beautiful memories, reminiscent of a fairy flight. Remembrances begin to unfold, bringing back sheer joy and delight.
The Indian Air Force started its historic journey with these very Westland Wapiti aircraft. Indian Air Force Act was passed on the 8th of October 1932, and on this very day, 6 young Indian officers, Subroto Mukherjee, Sarkar, Avan, Bhupender Singh, Amarjit Singh and Tandon were granted commission in the Indian Air Force after 2 years training at Royal Air Force Flying College, Cranwell. A flight of No. 1 Squadron was set up at Drigg Road, Karachi on the 1st of April 1933 with 4 Westland Wapiti aircraft. Along with these 6 officers were 19 Indian technicians who had been given training as Hawaii sepoys for the maintenance of these aircraft. One amongst them was Harjinder Singh, who later rose to the rank of Air Vice Marshal and became the first Indian Air Officer Commanding-in-Chief of the Maintenance Command. In October 1937, No. 1 Squadron was moved to Waziristan area in the northwest frontier province to suppress the rebellion of the tribals. By the end of 1939, SP engineer K.K. Majumdar, Ranganathan, Meher Singh, R.H.D. Singh, S.N. Goyal, Pritipal Singh and I had also joined the squadron in small batches after passing out from Cranwell. All the 3 A, B and C flights of the squadron had become functional with flying officers Subroto Mukherjee, SP Engineer, and KK Majumdar as their flight commanders. During the Waziristan operation, the pilots of No. 1 Squadron had gained invaluable experience of flying low in mountainous terrain, facing the enemy gunfire and bombing the tricky enemy positions. The performance of No. 1 Squadron was praiseworthy. SP Engineer was the first Indian Air Force officer to be awarded mentioned in dispatches. In the valley of Shaidar, Meher Singh's aircraft loaded with bombs was hit by enemy ground fire and crash-landed in the uneven mountainous area. Meher Singh and his gunner got out of the aircraft and, courageously escaping from the armed tribals, ran throughout the night to reach the Indian post. Next morning, Meher Singh again took off in another aircraft and started attacking the tribals. In 1939, the Second World War broke out in Europe. Impressed by the performance of No. 1 Squadron in Waziristan, the British government decided to expand the Indian Air Force. Coastal defense flights were established at Karachi, Bombay, Madras, Cochin, and Calcutta, and several flying training schools were opened. In 1941, Japan also jumped into the war. The Japanese forces reached Burma, sweeping through Philippines, Singapore, and Malaya. The British and Indian Air Forces came under heavy pressure, facing the Japanese onslaught. To counter the advancing enemy forces, they urgently needed the strategic information about the enemy and their activities, and also airstrikes on the enemy positions by Indian Air Force. For this role, No. 1 Squadron, equipped with Lysander aircraft, was ordered to proceed to Burma under the command of Squadron Leader Majumdar, popularly known as Jumbo. On the evening of 1st February 1942, the squadron landed at Toungoo Air Base in Burma. After landing, Jumbo dispersed all his aircraft and camouflaged them under the trees and bushes. As anticipated by Jumbo, Japanese aircraft bombed Toungoo airfield twice on that night. Some RAF aircraft were damaged, but because of Jumbo's far-sightedness, all aircraft of No. 1 Squadron were safe. Jumbo took up the challenge and decided to hit back the Japanese. Early the next morning, Jumbo got 2 bomb racks fitted on his aircraft, mounted 2 250-pound bombs, and took off alone to attack the Japanese Huangshuo airfield. Flying very low and undetected, he dropped the bombs over the Japanese hangar and returned back. And next morning, he led the entire squadron of Lysanders, each fitted with 2 250-pound bombs, over the Huangshuo airfield without any fighter escorts. The squadron scored direct hits on airfield buildings and a wireless station. With the innovation and flying skill of their pilots and technicians, No. 1 Squadron had been converted into a bomber squadron. In the next few days, apart from providing close support to their army, they bombed Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai airfields several times. Jumbo invariably led every mission of his squadron. From Toungoo, No. 1 Squadron was moved to Rangoon, where it earned a great reputation in the close support role. Later on, the squadron was moved to Lashio to support the 5th Chinese Army. And once again, the squadron provided valuable reconnaissance and close air support to the Chinese army. General Chiang Kai-shek complimented the effort of No. 1 Squadron and congratulated Jumbo and his men. Later, he presented golden wings to pilots of No. 1 Squadron of Indian Air Force as a token of appreciation of their work. Squadron leader KK Majumdar was the first Indian Air Force officer to be decorated with Distinguished Flying Cross. Field Marshal Wavell himself went to Lashio to personally congratulate Jumbo for his achievements. In March 1942, Number 1 Squadron was recalled back from Burma. Jumbo was posted to Air Headquarters, where he pursued his objective of expansion of Indian Air Force. For its excellent performance during the Burma campaign, the recruitment, training and expansion of the Indian Air Force was paid a special attention by the British government. The coastal defense flights were converted to regular squadrons. Number 2, 4 and 6 squadrons were equipped with Hurricane aircraft of the Battle of Britain fame, while number 7 and 8 squadrons were given multi-vengeance dive bombers. By the beginning of 1943, the strength of Indian Air Force had gone up to 9 squadrons. In this very year, the Allied forces had started mounting increased pressure on the Arakan front. The 5th Indian Division started advancing towards Muang Do, and at the same time, the 7th Indian Division started advancing towards Butidang. The Japanese forces surrounded the 7th Indian Division by cutting off the road behind them. 7th Division split into small splinter groups which were fighting for their survival. At this stage, Number 6 Squadron, under the command of Squadron Leader Meher Singh, was sent to Arakan front to help the ground forces. Number 6 Squadron landed at Cox's Bazar airfield and immediately started close support sorties, strafing the Japanese forces and providing vital reconnaissance information about their movements to the Indian Army. Number 6 Squadron literally became the cutting edge as well as eyes and ears of the 7th Indian Division, thereby helping them to regroup and advance towards Butidang. By the end of November, the 5th Indian Division also advanced and occupied Muang Do. The squadron flew 1,000 missions in 3 months. Meher Singh, who like Jumbo led almost every mission himself, was awarded the coveted Distinguished Service Order and became the only Indian Air Force officer to receive this unique honor. In September 1943, I was promoted to the rank of Squadron Leader and given the command of Number 1 Squadron, which was then equipped with Hurricane aircraft. On one of the occasions when Field Marshal Auchinleck visited our squadron at Kohat, I made a request to him that my squadron was operationally fit and all the crew were keen to take part in the war operations. After the setback at Arakan, the Japanese had mounted thrust from Chindwan riverside to the Imphal valley, from where they wanted to enter Assam. In February 1944, we were asked to move to Imphal to help the Indian Army. The Japanese had cut off the roads to Dimapur, Kohima and Imphal, thereby surrounding the 17th Indian Division, which was under heavy pressure. At this critical moment, Number 1 Squadron landed at Imphal, which was besieged by the Japanese forces, and the only approach was through the air route. Without wasting any time, we started operational sorties for close support to the army and providing information of the enemy positions to our troops. In the unknown and difficult terrain, we were flying sorties from dawn to dusk, and in moonlit nights, we operated for longer hours. Many a times, our air crew slept under the wings of the aircraft so that they could commence their sorties early in the morning. Our aircraft inflicted severe damage to the enemy ammunition dumps, fuel dumps, and their radar communications. The Japanese activities were slowed down and restricted. One evening, when I was returning from an attack sortie, I noticed some heavy movement of people in the valley below. I immediately turned back, flying low in the valley, and observed that Japanese forces were trying to enter the Imphal valley. They were so close to our airfield that our runway was almost within their artillery range. I immediately landed back. It was late in the evening and RAF squadrons had already packed up. I gathered all my aircrew and literally within a few minutes, all the 16 aircraft of our squadron were attacking the advancing Japanese army, destroying their vehicles, artillery guns, weapons and supplies, and rendering them unable to advance. Due to these unexpected and sudden continuous air attacks, the Japanese army got demoralized and started retreating. This was a turning point as the Japanese forces started losing ground in the Imphal Valley. This was the beginning of the defeat for Japanese. Imphal was safe. In 20 weeks, our squadron had flown as many as 1,600 sorties in 2,200 hours of operational flying. The serviceability of our squadron was nearly 100% during these operations, which was far better than the performance of any other squadron during this war. In this operation, our squadron had won 9 DFCs and our engineering officer Ram Singh was awarded Member of British Empire. It was indeed a proud day for our squadron when the Supreme Commander of Southeast Asia Command, Lord Louis Mountbatten himself came to Imphal and pinned the DFC on my chest. But for all this glory, our squadron had paid a heavy price. Out of 21 pilots who had come from Kohat to Imphal, only 5 had returned back home. Even today, the memory of their valor, loyalty and patriotism evokes a sense of pride and gratitude mixed with emotions and sadness. At Air Headquarters, Squadron Leader K.K. Majumdar was promoted out of turn to the rank of Wing Commander, but Jumbo's heart and soul were in the battlefield. He was longing to return to the war front, for which he volunteered to relinquish his rank for the sake of taking part in the operations. Ultimately, in March 1944, Jumbo was attached to a RAF squadron engaged in providing close support to the Allied forces attacking Normandy beaches. Here, because of his heroic deeds, Jumbo's reputation was soon established as a team leader. After the D-Day, Jumbo volunteered to undertake the hazardous mission of dangerous photo reconnaissance of the heavily defended Fallacy Gap, where he succeeded in bringing some very useful photographs which helped General Montgomery to achieve success over there. In January 1945, Jumbo was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, once again, being the only Indian to win a bar to DFC. With the dropping of atom bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan succumbed to defeat in August 1945, and also the Second World War came to an end. During this war, the pilots of Indian Air Force were awarded 1 Distinguished Service Order, 21 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 1 bar to DFC, and 45 mentioned in dispatches. And over 50 Indian Air Force pilots became martyrs in this war. Wing Commander K.K. Majumdar had become famous as an air ace. He was appointed as the commanding officer of the Air Force display flight, whose job was to tour the country, giving air displays to attract the youth to join the Indian Air Force. On the 17th of February 1945, an air show was organized by Chinese Air Force at Walton Airfield near Lahore. The aerobatic display by Jumbo being the prime attraction of the show and was scheduled to be its grand finale. While performing some thrilling aerobatics and complicated turns, suddenly something went wrong. Jumbo's aircraft went out of control and crashed, and was soon engulfed in flames. In space of one tragic instance, the Indian Air Force had lost its most promising officer and the country one of its noblest sons. Harjinder Singh retrieved the half-burnt goggles and the harness-locking pin from the burnt debris of the aircraft. These items are on display in this museum to rekindle the memory of a brave and courageous patriot, a saga of commitment, dedication, and valor which will always inspire the successive generations of the Indian Air Force. In appreciation of the heroic deeds of its aircrew and men, the service was honored with the bestowal of prefix Royal before Indian Air Force by His Majesty the King of England in March 1945, thus making it Royal Indian Air Force. 15th August 1947 was a red-letter day in the India's history when India became free from British rule. With the division and partition of the country, its small air force was also split into two parts. Some of the well-established and permanent air bases like Karachi, Risalpur, Sargodha, Rawalpindi, Peshawar and Kohat became a part of Pakistan. India, in its share, got only one permanent base, Ambala, a few unestablished air bases and 6.5 scattered squadrons. Subroto Mukherjee was promoted to the rank of Air Vice Marshal and appointed Deputy Chief of Air Staff. Subroto Mukherjee, my first squadron commander, the senior-most officer of the Indian Air Force, and the first Indian Chief of Air Staff. A man with excellent human qualities, dedication and discipline. A mature, far-sighted and sensitive person who believed in looking after and helping his subordinates rather than finding faults with them. 26th January 1950, India became a republic. The prefix Royal was detached from Royal Indian Air Force, thus making it again the Indian Air Force. On 1st April 1954, Subroto Mukherjee was appointed as the Commander-in-Chief of the Indian Air Force in the rank of Air Marshal, and on the same day, the President of India awarded new colours to the Indian Air Force. On 1st April 1955, Air Marshal Subroto Mukherjee was redesignated as Chief of Air Staff. With a great vision and farsightedness, Subroto undertook the task of expansion and modernization of Indian Air Force. Shortly after independence, tribal mercenaries, clothed, fed and armed by Pakistan, with some Pakistani military commanders leading them, invaded the Kashmir Valley. After occupying Uri and Baramulla, they were heading for Srinagar. It was neither feasible nor possible for the Indian Army to reach and save Srinagar by land route. The Indian Air Force was suddenly faced with its first big challenge to airlift the troops into Kashmir Valley, which was surrounded by high-range mountains from all sides. Also, it was not known whether the raiders had occupied the Srinagar airfield or not. Added to this were the unpredictable bad weather conditions. Undaunted by all these problems and the adverse circumstances, AOC of No. 1 Operational Group, Air Commodore Meher Singh, undertook the task of airlifting troops, arms, ammunition, equipment and supplies into the valley. Srinagar Airport was surrounded by the enemy and was within the range of their heavy guns. No. 12 Squadron, with the old Dakota aircraft, which had no provision of breathing oxygen for the aircrew at that high altitude, nor any facility of pressurization, were carrying out the sorties throughout the day and sometimes even late at nights, with Meher Baba setting an example himself by flying into the valley and supervising the entire operations. Meher Singh also mustered the help of civil aviation Dakotas, and inspiring them to the cause, he created a sort of air bridge between Delhi and Srinagar. Troops, armors and logistics supplies were being flown to Srinagar in a regular stream. Spitfire Harvard and Tempest aircraft provided air cover to the Dakotas and also kept on hitting the enemy targets. The Indian Army, after reaching Srinagar, recaptured Baramulla on the 8th of November and Uri on 13th November. On the other side, the raiders had made a heavy thrust towards Poonch and surrounded it from all sides. Poonch was only reachable by air, but there was no airstrip for landing. Most of the equipment para-dropped over there was lost, as it went into steep ravines of the valley. A very small, rough and kacha airfield was prepared after a week's day and night effort by the army and the refugees gathered in Poonch. As usual, Meher Singh himself piloted the 1st Dakota to land there in the most trying circumstances and difficult conditions. And then the inspired pilots of number 12 Squadron started doing 10 to 12 sorties per day, airlifting troops, weaponry and supplies. On their return flights, the aircraft brought back injured troops and refugees, and then Meher Baba inflicted an unexpected and lethal blow to the enemy which surprised them completely. He carried a large number of 250-pound bombs in Dakota aircraft, and flying low in continuous area, these bombs were rolled out of rear fuselage doors and dropped over the enemy. This daring, innovative and improvised carpet bombing proved very effective and demoralized the raiders. Poonch was saved and freed from the enemy. But Leh was still under the siege of enemy. The raiders made a revengeful retaliation with full force on the Leh area. The average height of the hills around Leh being approximately 20,000 feet, Dakota aircraft were incapable of crossing these hill ranges without the facility of pressurization and de-icing equipment. Meher Singh opted for a rather dangerous alternative, deciding to fly low in between the hills through the zigzag valley. Flying through the thick clouds and suddenly coming across a blind hill required tremendous courage, reflexes and flying skill to cross through the hazardous valley. Meher Singh piloted the 1st Dakota himself to make a historic landing at Leh, and then the inspired and courageous pilots of number 12 Squadron followed suit, airlifting sufficient troops, armaments and logistic supplies in Leh, which helped the army in pushing the raiders out of the Leh Valley. On 31st January 1949, ceasefire was declared and the line of control was established. The Valley of Kashmir shall always cherish the heroic deeds of Meher Baba and the brave and dedicated pilots of number 12 Squadron. Air Commodore Meher Singh was awarded Mahavir Chakra. On 11th March 1952, Air Commodore Meher Singh, DSO, MVC, was killed in an unfortunate air accident. A magnificent leader like Subroto Mukherjee and courageous as well as skillful ace pilots like Jumbo Majumdar and Baba Meher Singh are the rare blessings of nature to any service. Such were the people who laid the foundation of the Indian Air Force, setting an example of patriotism, valor, dedication, and professionalism that inspire the future generations. The Indian nation will always remember them with pride and honor.
Those magnificent companions, a breed so rare, fondly remembered by their flying machines, the resonance of their valor still in the air. It is so long that they passed away, but the ambience bears their ecstasy even today.
On 15th of February 1948, I was married to Teji, an accomplished, modest and kind-hearted lady who took keen interest in the welfare of the Indian Air Force personnel and their families. In December 1950, I was appointed as Air Officer Commanding of the Operational Command in the rank of Air Commodore. Around this time only, the first jet aircraft vampires were inducted into the Indian Air Force, gradually followed by Tufani Mistiers, Nats, Hunters, and long-range bombers, Canberra aircraft. After serving as Air Officer in Charge Personnel and Organization at Air Headquarters from December 1952 to 1955, I was once again posted to Operational Command from 1955 to 1959. During this tenure, I was promoted to the rank of Air Vice Marshal. On the 8th of November 1960, Air Marshal Subrodo Mukherjee passed away in Tokyo. Air Marshal S.P. Engineer was appointed as Chief of Air Staff. With his professional acumen, he capably guided the Indian Air Force for the next 3 years. By the end of 1962, the Government of India had approved a cadre of 45 squadrons for the Indian Air Force. In January 1963, I was made the Deputy Chief of Air Staff, and later, on 5th August 1963, I took over as the Vice Chief of Air Staff. On the 1st of August 1964, I was appointed as the Chief of the Air Staff in the rank of Air Marshal. During July and August 1965, the then rulers of Pakistan had started their efforts to spread communal disharmony and unrest in the valley of Kashmir by inducting infiltrators comprising of Razakars and Mujahid trained by Pakistan Army. But when they failed in their mission, Pakistan Army launched a sudden attack on the Chamb-Jaurian sector. 70 to 90 tanks, heavy artillery and an infantry brigade started advancing with the intention of cutting off Akhnur sector. In the absence of any heavy artillery support, with our army in that area, it was difficult to stop the advancing enemy forces. Chief of Army Staff General J.N. Chowdhury called for immediate airstrikes on the advancing armored vehicles and tanks. Defense Minister asked me as to how soon could Air Force get into action and provide air support to our army. Within 1 hour was my spontaneous reply. I received the orders at 4 in the evening, and at 5:19 p.m., 4 Vampire aircraft took off from Pathankot Air Base and started attacking the advancing Pakistani tanks and armored vehicles. Soon after, missed air aircraft also joined the action. By the time it was dark, 26 airstrike missions had been launched, destroying 13 Pakistani tanks and 62 armored vehicles. This was a day of reckoning and perhaps the most challenging moment of my life. Launching of airstrikes at such a short notice implied fears and possibility of heavy losses, casualties, and mishaps. The added handicap was that our aircraft had no night fighting capabilities and facilities. Therefore, there were a few setbacks, losses, and some trying moments. But the Pakistani attack was definitely blunted. In the next few days, heavy losses were inflicted on the Pakistani tanks, armored vehicles, and the advancing troops. 3 days later, the Defense Minister announced in the Parliament, "We are proud of our Air Force, which has shot down a number of Pakistani Sabre fighter aircraft in the aerial combats." The Indian Army launched a counter-attack and opened up fronts in Lahore-Kasur sector. On the evening of 6 September 1965, in sheer panic and frustration, Pakistan launched preemptive air attack on our air bases at Pathankot, Adampur and Halwara. In the counter-attacks, Indian Air Force used its long-range bombers, Canberra aircraft and carried out heavy aerial bombing on almost all the Pakistani air bases up to Peshawar. At the same time, our hunters, missed airs, Tufanis and Canberras kept on attacking Pakistani tanks, armored vehicles, ammunition dumps, radar stations, as well as supply lines of Pakistan Army. Due to the air superiority of Indian Air Force in this conflict, Pakistan had lost about 70 tanks, while we lost only 4 tanks to their air attacks. The morale of Pakistani armed forces had been shattered, and they were trying to seek help from other countries to even sustain the war initiated by them. On the morning of 22nd September 1965, the ceasefire was declared. If the operations had been allowed to continue for a few more days, perhaps there would have been a different story to tell.
Whenever guns blazed from the west, our air warriors moved with skill and valor. Ill designs of the enemy were laid to rest, pushing them back beyond their own nest.
On 24th November 1965, I was awarded Padma Vibhushan, a recognition to the efforts, sacrifices, loyalty and gallantry of the officers and men of Indian Air Force. The post of Chief of Air Staff was upgraded to the rank of Air Chief Marshal, thus bringing it in parity to the post of the Army Chief. On 15th January 1966, I was reappointed as Chief of the Air Staff in the rank of Air Chief Marshal. Keeping aside the feelings of victory and success, we started analysis of our war effort, identifying our shortcomings and shortfalls so that we learn and improve from our mistakes in various fields of operational planning and execution. By 1968-69, the Indian Air Force had attained its full cadre strength of 45 squadrons and was fully prepared to face any challenge. 15th July 1969 was the day of my retirement. It is difficult for me to put in words my appreciation of the immense love, respect, loyalty and faith bestowed upon me by my officers and men of all ranks during the 30 years of my service.
The time of departure was very heartrending. With friends all over and flowers everywhere, atmosphere filled with joy and pleasure. Of love there was no measure. If the Almighty were to descend and offer me a choice of life again, I would ask nothing different but to fly and touch the sky with glory again and again.
I have no doubt in my mind that it was the service, training and discipline which enabled me to achieve whatever laurels I had in my life. I was appointed ambassador to Switzerland in 1971 and then High Commissioner to Kenya in 1974. In 1978, I was made member of the Minorities Commission and later, in 1989, appointed Lieutenant Governor of Delhi. While I was in Switzerland in 1971, the relations between India and Pakistan deteriorated once again. On the 3rd of December 1971, Pakistan launched aerial attacks on many of our air bases without any declaration of war or giving any warning. But this time, Indian Air Force was well prepared for the counter-action and a befitting reply. On the very same day, the Indian Air Force bombers launched heavy bombing attacks on Sialkot, Chander, Sargodha, Mianwali, Murid, Risalpur and Pasroor in West Pakistan and also Tejgaon as well as Kurmitola air bases in East Pakistan. The Karachi oil refinery and many other strategic targets were destroyed and made inoperative by the Indian Air Force attacks. In the eastern sector, the Indian Air Force attained complete air superiority and demoralized the Pakistan Army with its round-the-clock bombing and rocket attacks. On the 16th of December 1971, General A.K. Niazi surrendered along with 90,000 troops in the eastern sector. But on the western front, the Pakistani forces were still trying some pranks. In the Rajasthan sector, a Pakistani tank regiment and an infantry brigade suddenly made a deep thrust towards Longewala. A small Indian Army force present over there was unable to stop them. In this hour of crisis, 4 Hunter aircraft based at Jaisalmer were pressed into action for attacking the fast advancing Pakistani tanks in the Longewala desert with rockets. Round-the-clock sorties destroyed 37 Pakistani tanks, thus creating what came to be known as a graveyard of the Pakistani armor. Daring low-level carpet bombing missions by 4 to 6 AN-12 aircraft in Changamanga area destroyed the strategic and military targets in western sector, demoralizing the enemy completely. During this war, the Indian Air Force, under the able leadership of Air Chief Marshal P.C. Lal, exhibited an admirable display of their operational capabilities, flexibility, and professional standards. Pakistan's disastrous defeat in 1971 war was an unforgettable lesson for them.
We are a peace-loving nation, worth some name. When a friend or foe cheats or commits aggression, it is not only a sin, but a matter of shame. He deserves to be taught an unforgettable lesson, and this time we just did the same.
Subsequently, the leadership of Indian Air Force has been in such capable hands as Air Chief Marshal O.P. Mehra, Air Chief Marshal H. Mulgavkar, Air Chief Marshal I.H. Latif, Air Chief Marshal Dilbagh Singh, Air Chief Marshal L.M. Katre, Air Chief Marshal Dennis LaFontaine, Air Chief Marshal S.K. Mehra, Air Chief Marshal N.C. Suri, Air Chief Marshal S.K. Cole, Air Chief Marshal S.K. Serene, Air Chief Marshal A.Y. Tipnis, Air Chief Marshal S. Krishnaswamy, and Air Chief Marshal S.P. Tyagi. All these air chiefs have guided the destiny of the Indian Air Force with great farsightedness, commitment, devotion, and dedication to the service, which has made the Indian Air Force one of the most modern and professional air forces of today, equipped with a variety of aircraft ranging from the vintage Canberras to the most modern Su-30 MKI. After the futile attempts and debacle in the Siachen Glacier, Pakistan once again in 1999 embarked upon misadventure in the Kargil sector. Regular Pakistani soldiers crossed the line of control in the garb of Mujahideen and made permanent bunkers and took positions on the hilltops in order to help the Mujahideen forces in their advance towards Srinagar-Zojila highway. Indian Air Force carried out an air reconnaissance of the terrain and was able to identify the enemy bunkers, strategic targets, and the movements of their troops. Regular strike missions were undertaken to destroy the enemy bunkers, their supply lines, and ammunition dumps, which helped our army to successfully uproot the enemy and push them back from Kargil sector. The contribution of the Indian Air Force in Kargil War was not only commendable and meaningful, but also a decisive factor in this operation. Today, the Indian Air Force has developed into an ultra-modern and state-of-the-art service. We have MiG-21 fighter aircraft comprising the backbone of our fleet for the last 4 decades, and even today, its upgraded version, MiG-21 Bison, is considered as one of the most successful, reliable, and proficient fighter aircraft. Among the ground attack aircraft, Indian Air Force has Jaguars fitted with laser designation equipment and MiG-23 ML fighter bombers, which can carry very heavy payloads of weapons and penetrate deep into the enemy territory, destroying their strategic military targets. The Indian Air Force also has excellent multi-role aircraft Mirage 2000, which is capable of carrying laser-guided bombs, missiles and rockets, and can accurately aim from very high altitudes. Besides these, Sukhoi series ultra-modern aircraft Su-30 has added great punch and power to the strike capability of Indian Air Force. Fitted with close combat and long-range missiles and carrying 30 mm cannons, these aircraft are equipped with multi-tracking radar. Su-30 and its upgraded version Su-30 MKI form the cutting edge of Indian Air Force. In today's warfare, armed and attack helicopters have acquired a significant role. Our Mi-25 and Mi-35 attack helicopters have proved their effectiveness in targeting and destroying the hidden enemy targets in the hills and their deep ravines. Today, due to its long range and its heavy airlift capacity, the transport fleet of Indian Air Force has become a force multiplier not only for the Indian Air Force but also for army and paramilitary forces. Troops, armored vehicles, ammunition and supplies can be transported from one corner of the country to its farthest end within few hours to meet any emerging situation. IL-78, which is a flight refueler aircraft, can refuel a large number of fighter aircraft in mid-air, enabling them to fly much longer, thus enhancing their lethality. An important component of the transport fleet are transport helicopters. Our Mi-26 helicopters can transport troops, heavy vehicles and supplies in the hilly terrain most effectively. In the role of an ambulance, Mi-26 can carry as many as 60 casualty stretchers at a time. India is a large country with various types of terrains stretching many thousands of miles. For defense of its vast airspace, we have an effective and proactive air defense ground environment system which promptly detects the intruding fighter aircraft and automatically informs our fighter bases and activates the missiles to destroy the intruder immediately. Our main air defense aircraft are MiG-21 Bison, MiG-23 MF, Mirage 2000 and MiG-29, which are rated amongst the best interception aircraft. MiG-29 has the capacity to attack targets by air-to-air missiles even when they are outside the visual range. An important and significant addition to Indian Air Force is that of unmanned aerial vehicle, the UAV. This pilotless aircraft, which can go deep into the enemy territory. It is fitted with ultra-modern cameras and laser designation system, which can identify and locate strategic enemy targets and bring accurate reconnaissance material for war planning. Today, our well-modernized Indian Air Force is keeping abreast with the latest developments in the field of aerospace as well as air warfare. Indigenized development and manufacture of the ultra-modern aircraft, electronics and technology is a leap towards self-sufficiency. The Light Combat Aircraft, known as LCA, designed and developed by our own engineers at Bangalore, has successfully completed several test flights. Fitted with state-of-the-art electronics and gadgets, the LCA is under induction to the service in the near future. Apart from this, light combat helicopters and advanced light helicopters are also in advanced stages of flight testing and utility trials.
Abreast with the challenges of changing time, we too have changed and modernized, acquiring latest weaponry and the skill. No one to dare or play dirty. We have the lethal power to destroy and kill. They will always be revered in our hearts. Those who laid their life for the motherland. With a smile, they willingly embraced death to uphold the honor of their land. The valiant ones who flew for the Air Force and all young hearts of the sky. Death, be not proud. The brave heart never die. Their heart and soul but one, fused together, a part of our universe. Their shining inspiration a star so bright, lighting our path till eternity. A beacon for our youth of tomorrow. Long live the bastion of Indian Air Force, created by the sweat of our brow. Our rich tradition to flourish and grow.
Let us resolve together to achieve the goal. The motherland demands your heart and soul. bringing pride and honor to our martyrs, always touching the sky with glory, with glory.